This podfic contains content that may be disturbing for some viewers, including mentions of violence, guns, and physical and emotional abuse. Please check out the complete list of content warnings in the description, and proceed with caution if you are sensitive to these topics. Hello my lovely little gemstones, it's Afira, and today I'll be reading When the Chips Are Down by Whiskey with Patron. Chapter 30. It's not a date, we're just business partners. Price stared intently at her compact mirror as she fixed her hair. So, Hot Topic, where to next? Back to the hotel? Andy's grip was tight on the strap of the satchel over her shoulder. She was itching to return to the others, but oddly enough, she wanted to stay out with Price for a little while longer. Maybe she was just nervous about confronting Patton. Why don't we grab some lunch? Andy suggested as she sat on the motorbike. We're already out here. Might as well. Price snapped her mirror shut. Sure. But we're not going to one of your weird fast food places. I'll take you to a restaurant. There's a nice one on Front Street. Andy raised a brow. I don't think I can afford anything too nice. Price waved a hand dismissively as she sat behind Andy. Oh, I'll cover the bill, don't worry. Andy tried not to show her surprise at that. She didn't think Price would want to pay for anything. Andy put her helmet on. Then let's go, Princey. It didn't take long to get to Front Street. Andy almost wished the ride was longer. She had to admit, she enjoyed driving Remy's bike, especially with someone sitting behind her, with their hands around her waist. It made for a pretty romantic scene. Or it would be romantic if any other girl but Price was the one behind her. Andy didn't like Price, obviously. They parked along the sidewalk again, and Price gestured to the restaurant with a flourish. The finest diner in all of Sidehill. She hopped off the bike and took off her helmet. Andy followed suit. Surprisingly, the diner didn't look that impressive. Andy had been expecting to see a big, fancy restaurant, not a quaint diner. Wow, Princey, Andy said with a smirk. I would have thought you'd take me somewhere extravagant. Don't you know how to treat a lady? Price's face flushed at that. Andy was silent as she realized that her joke implied that Price was taking her on a date. Andy cleared her throat and ignored the growing heat in her cheeks. Let's go get a table. They walked side by side to the door. A bell above the door chimed as they stepped over the threshold. The inside of the diner was dimly lit with soft white strings of light that hung from the ceiling. The space was a bit cramped with the amount of tables scattered around the floor. Paintings hung on the walls, and each one was so abstract that Andy couldn't decipher what the hell they were supposed to be pictures of. Red plaid tablecloths covered each table. All the strange decorations gave this place a weird atmosphere, like it couldn't decide what aesthetic it was going for. Only a few of the tables were occupied. Price sat down at a table. Andy sat across from her. And don't be freaked out by all the art stuff, Price said. This place has the loveliest food in the entire city. Andy raised an eyebrow at a painting that looked like it could either be a squid or a pineapple. I'll take your word for it. What can I get for you ladies? Andy jumped at the voice and looked up. A waiter stood at their table, a smile on his face and a notepad in his hand. He had a couple menus tucked under his arm. I'll get a Long Island iced tea, Price said. Andy, what drink would you like? Andy hesitated as the waiter placed their menus in front of them. What options were there? Was she supposed to get something alcoholic like Price, or would it be okay if she just got water? Would someone judge her if she ordered chocolate milk? Did they even have chocolate milk here? Andy opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It had been so long since she'd gone to a restaurant. She didn't know what to say. She'll have a water, Price said. Thank you, sir. The waiter left, and Andy breathed a sigh of relief. She really needed to get out more. Maybe that would keep her from being so anxious in public. Price furrowed her brow in concern. Andy, are you okay? Andy nodded. She didn't want to worry Price. Yeah, I'm good. I just haven't been out in a while. You were fine with Faye. That was different, Andy muttered, tugging on her sweater strings. She's in our line of work, and I didn't have to talk to anyone else. I'm usually behind a screen. I don't get out in the real world that much. Price smiled softly. Well, then I'll order for you, so you don't have to talk. Let me know what you want. She flipped open her menu and scanned the pages. Andy blinked at Price, dumbfounded by her offer to help. She averted her gaze. Thanks, she mumbled. She started flipping through the menu. She didn't see any familiar foods. She didn't even know what half of this stuff was. There might be more stuff on the appetizers page, Price said quietly. Andy flipped back to the first page of the menu. Sure enough, there were a few things Andy vaguely recognized. I'll just get some fries, Andy said. She shut her menu and set it on the table, decidedly done with trying to figure out what she wants. This is exactly why she didn't go out to eat, especially on dates. It was so stressful. Price set down her own menu. Are you okay, Andy? You seem tense. Andy ran a hand through her hair. It's just been a while since I've been out. It's fine. We can go, Price offered. We can eat back at the hotel. Andy shook her head. She wasn't ready to confront Patton about his past yet. I'm good here. Andy still didn't know why Price looked so concerned. She was tempted to ask, but the waiter swept back in with a platter that held 2 glasses on it. He placed one in front of Price and one in front of Andy. Any food I can get for you? He asked. We'll get a basket of fries and a platter of garlic biscuits, Price said, folding up both menus and handing them to the waiter. Thank you. As soon as the waiter left, Andy breathed a small sigh of relief. She didn't know why she was so anxious all of a sudden. Maybe it was just the inherent nerves of being on the run with Patton Hart. Speaking of which, she decided she probably shouldn't drink her water. It could have been poisoned or drugged after all. Price didn't seem to have the same concerns. So, Andy, you don't get out in the field much? She took a sip of her drink. Andy shook her head. No, all my work is behind the scenes. How often do you get outside? Andy thought about that one. Maybe once every couple weeks. Maybe more if I have to change locations in the city. Price gaped at her. So you're a hermit? You just don't leave your house? No, not really. If I have a house at the time. I'll hide out with Thomas sometimes if I have to, but I don't really go out unless I'm desperate for food or a place to stay. Damn. Price stirred her drink with her finger. What kind of jobs do you normally run? Andy shrugged. Simple hacking shit. It doesn't usually take much effort, and it pays well. I take a few bigger jobs if I'm low on cash. That's how I like to work too, Price said. Low effort stuff for more money. But why did you decide on hacking? Always had a knack for technology, I guess. I started out doing small hacking stuff for people who knew me and were willing to pay, but I got swept into the business after I dropped out of school. You dropped out? Price sounded astonished. Why? I would have thought you'd be great at school. Andy scoffed. The school system doesn't exactly accommodate for kids with anxiety, Princey. Failed almost all my exams and dropped out as soon as I turned 16. Damn, Price said. So, how'd you meet Sunglasses? How long have you known him? Remy's a bit of a long story. Price shrugged and leaned back in her chair. We've got time. She looked up. Oh, food's here. Their waiter swept by the table and placed a couple of plates between them. As soon as he left, Andy raised a brow at the food. Fast service. We only got appetizers, Price said, plucking a fry off Andy's plate. Besides, business is slow here. Anyway, you and Sunglasses? Andy sighed. She didn't often talk to people about her life. What if she started rambling? Or worse yet, what if she stumbled over her words while telling the story? She decided to keep it short. I met him over MySpace when I was 13. Price furrowed her brow. Wait, how old was he at the time? I don't know, like 20-something? In fairness, I didn't tell him I was a kid until years after we started talking. Actually, I didn't really tell him, he just kind of found out. How'd he find out? So, trying to keep the story short apparently didn't work. Okay, Andy started. At school, I mostly forged notes and paperwork so I didn't have to ask my parents to do shit. So instead of putting my mom's number for the parent contact, I may have put Remy's number instead. It's not my fault I trusted him more than my own damn parents. Price's eyes widened as she munched on a garlic biscuit. Don't tell me the school called him instead of your parents. They did. I got in trouble because I told the teacher my parents said I didn't have to do a presentation in front of the class. They called Remy instead, and he pretended to be my big brother to get shit sorted out with the principal. He sort of became like an actual big brother to me after that. Or a weird uncle. Kind of both. Price chuckled and shook her head. That's quite a story. I guess. Andy bit into a fry. Question for you. How did you end up as a bounty hunter? Price's expression stiffened slightly, and Andy immediately felt bad for asking. Sorry, but you have to be a level 5 friend to unlock my tragic backstory. Price tilted her glass back and chugged half of her drink. She set it back on the table. How I got into this business isn't something I like to talk about. Andy was curious, but she didn't question Price further. Okay, sorry for asking. You just wanted to know, nothing to apologize for. Price rested her chin on her hand. So, what was your first hacking job? Well, the two of them talked for a while. Their conversation went everywhere, From Andy's job, to Price's family, to weird things they did as kids. Price nearly choked on her drink when Andy told her about the time she almost got Remy arrested at a petting zoo. Andy found herself laughing as Price dramatically recounted a time she had teamed up with a group of bounty hunters and gotten caught up in a circus performance. Andy was pretty sure most of it was exaggerated, but it was entertaining nonetheless. Price really had a way with words. Throughout the meal, Andy found herself listening intently to Price's stories. She liked the way Price's eyes lit up when she said something particularly exciting or dramatic. Price's bright white smile was infectious, and her enthusiastic gestures brought her words to life. Andy enjoyed listening to Price speak. Andy held back a giggle as she listened to Price's current story. Okay, run that one by me again. Price took a deep breath. Okay, so I'm trying to drive the car. My buddy Ace is covered in glitter and trying to navigate us to the nearest auto body shop while keeping us away from the cops. And the 7-year-old in the back of the car is trying to crawl out the windows to get outside. I'm still driving, and I don't want this kid jumping out of a moving vehicle, so I'm also trying to roll up the windows while Ace is yelling at me to turn left. Keep in mind, there's glitter all over the outside of the car, too, and the windshield wipers aren't doing shit to get rid of it. This can't be a real story, Andy said. Hot topic, I wish it wasn't a true story. This is the hardest job I've done yet. Price tapped her fingernails on the side of her empty glass. Anyway, Ace and I... She was cut short when her phone rang in her pocket. She jumped and scrambled to get it. Hang on, I gotta take this. She pressed her phone to her ear. Hello? Since Price was busy, Andy took the time to bring out her own phone and look at the time. They'd already been here for almost an hour. They should probably get back to the hotel so Remy didn't get worried. Really? Price said to the other person on the phone. She listened for a moment. Her previous excitement faded. Oh, that's who you're going after? I don't know. That's going to be pretty difficult. She kept tapping her fingernails on her glass. That's going to be hard, man. I don't think... She swallowed. You really think we could... She paused and listened to whoever was on the phone. Okay, that sounds good. I'll be there in a few. What's going on? Andy asked as soon as Price hung up. Price kept her gaze on the table. I have to go. I've got a job. Andy's heart sank. Oh, I thought you were gonna stay with us. Price scoffed. Oh, come on, Hot Topic. You really think I would stick around the minute I was out of range of your friend's guns? Her voice, which had been so excited just a minute ago, was now hard and angry. She dug around in her wallet and left a handful of 20s on the table. I've got shit to do. I don't have time for this. Andy couldn't explain why those words hurt so much, but they did. She thought they had fun today, despite the fact that they were looking into Patton's dangerous past for most of the morning. Her brief moment of hurt was replaced by annoyance. Well, you better not sell out Patton to anyone. For one, I still have to question him about the shit you helped me find. Price grimaced and didn't respond as she straightened out the little bit of mess she'd made on the table during lunch. Andy's annoyance grew. Princeton, you're not going to sell him out. Price strode to the door without a response. Andy clenched her jaw and stood. Price? Price kept walking. Andy stormed over to her and grabbed her sleeve. Price snatched her sleeve out of Andy's grip and whirled around. She glared at Andy with an anger that took her by surprise. She stepped back, half afraid that Price would pull a gun on her right in the restaurant. This is business, Price snapped. I don't have time for a brat like you. I'm a brat. Andy's anger grew. Look in a mirror. Why are you so upset about this? Because I thought you liked me. Price glared at her. Andy clamped her mouth shut, fists tight at her sides. You thought wrong. Price shoved the door open and left. Andy stared after her, dumbfounded. Price was right. Andy had been stupid to believe that Price would stay without someone threatening her. She shouldn't have believed that Price would stick with their little group. She certainly wouldn't stay because of Andy. Andy was just a random hacker that Price accidentally became acquainted with. Of course she didn't like Andy. Andy had thought that maybe Price would stay to help Andy question Patton, but thinking back on it, that was an absurd assumption to make. Patton was her target. Of course she wouldn't want to piss him off by accusing him of being an old assassin. She was only sticking with them because Remy threatened to shoot her if she sold Patton out. But she wasn't around Remy right now. She could do whatever she wanted. And apparently, she wanted to leave Andy behind. Excuse me, miss. Andy turned. A waiter stood behind her, a concerned look on his face. Everyone else in the restaurant was staring at her too. She suddenly felt ashamed for making a scene and interrupting everyone else's meals. Are you okay? The waiter asked. Andy's eyes burned with unshed tears. I'm fine. She made a beeline for the door. There was no sign of Price outside. and Andy offhandedly wondered where she'd gone and how she'd left so quickly. She shook her head. That didn't matter. Price didn't matter. Andy glanced down at the black brooch on her sweater, the one she'd bought with Price. She had half a mind to take it off and throw it into the street, but some part of her resisted. Andy grimaced and looked away from the shining piece of jewelry. Quickly shoving her helmet on, she shoved the keys into Remy's bike and started the engine. She drove away from the restaurant back towards the hotel. And if a couple tears ran down her face behind the screen of her helmet, then that was nobody's business. Patton should have been more careful. Remy didn't say a word to him after he saw the tattoo on Patton's shoulder, and Patton couldn't blame him for being mad. Patton had kept this from him for so long. Of course Remy would be angry, or maybe even scared. Thomas had returned to the hotel room after checking the perimeter of the building, but he must have sensed the tension in the room because he immediately left again, muttering some excuse about needing to go fill up his car. He'd gone again, leaving Patton and Remy alone. Patton sat on the bed, sliding the magazine of Remy's gun in and out of the chamber. Remy refused to go to sleep again. Instead, he stood by the window, smoking a cigarette. He'd opened the window so the room didn't get filled with smoke. Patton was pretty sure they weren't allowed to smoke indoors, but he wasn't about to tell Remy to put out the cigarette. He wasn't sure if that would make Remy more upset. Patton considered maybe saying something, breaking the ice, maybe even explaining his past as Poison Dart and everything else he was involved in. But every time he opened his mouth, he couldn't make the words come out. There was nothing he could say. Remy knew about part of Patton's past, and now he probably hated Patton. Patton heaved a sigh and shoved the magazine into the gun. He should stop playing with it. He shouldn't be holding a gun right now. He set it down in front of him, but even without it in his hands, his trigger finger wouldn't stop twitching. He grabbed it with his right hand to keep it still. Patton wanted to scream. He was forced back into this business against his will. Yesterday was the first time he'd shot someone since 2010, and now he was falling back into his old habits, messing around with guns, keeping an eye on the exit to any room he was in, moving his trigger finger at the slightest sound. He clenched his fists, resisting the urge to scratch at his shoulder. He wished he'd gotten that tattoo covered up a long time ago, but the insignia was easily recognizable to anyone in the business, and there was no way for him to know which tattoo artists weren't involved. He didn't want some artist from the Glassed Heart seeing that. He wondered what would happen if he did see a member of the Glassed Hearts again. Would they recognize him? Likely not, since Patton always used to cover his face while on the job. But what if someone had seen a glimpse of his face? He wasn't sure he'd be able to deal with the guilt. And the Glassed Hearts weren't the last of it. He remembered what he did to the Vine 39ers way back in 2004. That was almost worse. Patton shook his head. He shouldn't be wallowing in his guilt right now. That was all in the past. It happened, and he couldn't take it back. The door swung open. Patton snatched up the gun and flicked the safety off. Thomas and Andy stood in the doorway, and Patton breathed a sigh of relief. His relief was short-lived. It took him a moment to notice Price wasn't there, and another moment to realize that Andy's face was wet with tears. Thomas's arm was draped around her shoulders. Remy seemed to notice all this at the same time. He stopped leaning on the windowsill and turned to face Andy and Thomas. "What happened?" A plume of smoke drifted from his mouth as he spoke. Andy didn't respond. She shrugged Thomas's arm off her and crossed the room towards Remy. She crushed him in a hug as soon as she reached him and buried her face in his shirt. Free hand still holding a cigarette, Remy automatically wrapped an arm around her as soon as she hit his chest. He shoved a cigarette in his mouth and hugged her with both arms. "I got you," he muttered around the cigarette. Thomas and Patton exchanged confused glances. Patton didn't know what happened, but he got the feeling it had something to do with Price's absence. Remy narrowed his eyes. Patton had only ever seen that kind of rage in his eyes a few times before. At the moment, Patton was glad Remy didn't have his gun on him right now. If he did, he would storm out of the room and shoot Price as soon as he found her. He took his cigarette out of his mouth. Smoke streamed from his lips when he spoke. "I'm gonna kill that fucking bounty hunter." Chapter 31. Patton and the horrible, no good, very bad day. Patton took a hesitant step towards Remy and Andy. "Andy, what happened?" Andy took her face away from Remy's shirt to look at him, cheeks stained with tears. "Price is a fucking asshole," she mumbled, wiping her eyes. "We were out doing stuff, and she left because she got a job." Her eyes widened. "Shit, I didn't even think to ask what the job was. She and her bounty hunter friends might be coming after you. Fuck." "What were you guys doing?" Thomas asked. Andy didn't answer right away. She glanced at Patton. "Nothing. Just working on stuff." She shouldered her laptop bag, and Patton noticed that there was another black bag hanging from her shoulder alongside it. He decided not to ask what it was. Andy had her own work to take care of, and it wasn't Patton's business. Anyway, she left. Andy sniffled. I shouldn't be so fucking upset about this. I don't know why I'm... Damn it. It's okay, Thomas said. We'll have to get out of here in case she comes after us. Maybe we can even find her again, and convince her not to sell us out. Andy sighed. Maybe. She ran a hand through her hair. Shit, she hissed. I thought she was... I don't know. I thought she was fine. I thought maybe she wasn't an asshole. God damn it. Andy swiped at her eyes. I'm sorry. I thought I could trust her for some stupid reason. This is not your fault, Remy insisted. She's the one who decided to be an asshole. You didn't make her leave. Andy took a deep, shuddering breath. Yeah. She pulled away from Remy. We should go then, probably. I don't know how long it might take her friends to get here, if they are coming after us. We have to find a place to stay, Patton mumbled. Critic House? That might be our best option, Thomas agreed. Let's pack up. The four of them scrambled to shove all of their stuff into their bags. It didn't take long, since none of them had much of anything, but it still took longer than Patton would have liked it to. He wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. He didn't know if Price or any of her friends were already on their way to get him. Andy tossed the motorcycle keys to Remy. I'm riding with Thomas. I will too, Patton offered, hefting his backpack. He didn't want to be stuck on a motorbike with an upset Remy. Sounds good. Remy slung his bag over his shoulder. Let's go, babes. The four of them made a beeline for the door. As a group, they hurried down the hallway towards the lobby. Getting out of this place as quick as possible was their top priority. Andy dug around in her bag and tossed something to Remy. Connect that to your phone and call me. Remy furrowed his brow at the earpiece in his hands. He shrugged and pulled out his phone. They passed by the desk. We're checking out, Remy called, shoving the earpiece into his ear. Cancel the room booked under Remy Dormier. The receptionist, who wasn't the bounty hunter from last night, thank God, protested, but her insistent shouting fell on deaf ears. The four of them left the hotel. Thomas was already digging his keys out of his pocket when they entered the parking lot. Patton's hand slipped into his pocket, where he'd put Remy's gun. Remy might need it if he was going to be alone on his bike. Patton took the gun and held it out to Remy. Here. Remy shook his head as he grabbed one of his helmets. No, you're a better shot. Keep it. You need something to protect yourself, Patton argued. Here. Thomas grabbed his own gun out of his bag and shoved it into Remy's hands. Patton, I know you probably don't want to shoot people, but you're our best shot. You're keeping a gun on you. A pit of guilt settled in Patton's gut. He didn't like shooting people, but Thomas was right. Patton clambered into the back seat of Thomas's car as Andy took the passenger seat. He mentally swore at himself for letting everyone else keep that bounty hunter around. If they had just let her go from the beginning, this wouldn't have happened. He hadn't particularly trusted her from the start. He should have said something. Thomas drove out of the parking lot. Andy shoved her phone in the cup holder with one hand and grabbed her laptop with the other. Remy, I'm setting my GPS to the Critic House. Follow us there and keep an eye out for anyone suspicious. Gotcha, Remy's voice said through the speaker. Patton glanced behind them and saw Remy following them on his bike. He quickly buckled his seatbelt. He prayed that they wouldn't get into another car chase, but he got the feeling he wouldn't be so lucky. He kept a tight grip on the gun in his pocket as Thomas drove, glancing out the windows every few seconds to make sure no one was following them. He didn't like being so paranoid, but he had to stay on his toes. I'm not seeing anyone, Remy said. You guys? No. Thomas glanced at Andy's laptop screen and flicked his turn signal on. They kept driving, and Patton found himself eyeing the black satchel Andy had over her shoulder. He didn't know where she'd picked it up, but he was curious about it. Andy, he said, if you don't mind me asking, what's in that extra bag? Andy's shoulders stiffened. Nothing. Just something I picked up on the job. I'll tell you later. Judging by the shakiness in her voice, Patton was sure there was something more to whatever was in that satchel than she was letting on. He wanted to press her for answers, but he kept his mouth shut. Now was not the time. So, what exactly was this job you were doing? Thomas asked. Andy gave a shaky laugh. Well, it wasn't exactly a job. It was just something I was curious about. I needed Price's help on it because I didn't want to bother the rest of you. I'll ask you about it later. Patton furrowed his brow, suddenly confused. Ask us about what? Why would you be asking us about whatever's in the bag? Andy ran a hand through her hair. Okay, well, I wouldn't be asking all of you about it, just you. It's complicated, okay? I was looking into some things because I got curious about some shit I heard you say last night, and everything was fine, but now Price decided to run off and get her friends to come after you, so we don't really have time to talk about this. Her chest heaved as she regained her breath. Patton swallowed nervously. Thomas bit his lip and glanced at Andy's laptop again. "We'll figure it out when we get there," he said. A car honked out in the street. Their own vehicle swerved a little, and Patton yelped in surprise. He tightened his grip on his gun. "What happened?" "Someone ran a red light to pull up behind you," Remy shouted through Andy's phone. "They cut me off. I don't know if they're purposely following you, but I'm on their tail." Patton twisted around in his seat to look behind them. Remy and his bike were nowhere in sight. The vehicle right behind them was a white car. The person in the driver's seat didn't look like Price, but that didn't mean they weren't a bounty hunter. Patton didn't want to take any chances. He kept his eye on the car as they drove. Andy muttered a curse under her breath. "I wish I got Price's number or something. I could track her if I had some information." The keys of her laptop clacked as she typed. "I'll try to see who she's affiliated with, so we can figure out what we're up against. Patton, what does the driver in the car behind us look like?" Patton squinted. "Hard to tell, but I think it's a guy. Light brown skin, dark hair, scruffy, unshaven face, and he's wearing a trench coat, I think. I can't see much more. Does he look like he could be a detective by any chance?" "Yeah, I guess. Why?" "That might be Ace Spencer. He's a detective in the city, but he's in the Critic House's database as a bounty hunter. I'm going through their stuff to see who else they're with." "Detective Spencer?" Remy asked. "Shit, I bumped into the guy a while back. Got into some legal trouble. Guy nearly got me arrested. He's low-key been looking for me for a while, but I don't know if he wants to find me for legal justice or legal services. Maybe I can get him away. Hang on." Patton watched as Remy pulled his bike up next to the white car. His trigger finger twitched as he watched Remy lift the visor of his helmet. He waved at the driver of the car, who glanced over and did a double-take when he saw Remy's face. It was too hard to hear Remy's voice over the speaker now that the wind was blowing through his helmet. Ace nodded once at Remy as he lowered his visor. The white car slowed down and pulled into another lane. Remy swerved back behind Thomas's car. "So, Ace was a little too happy to see me," he said. "But he said he might leave us alone if I could help him track down a couple other people he's had his eye on. He's not contacting anyone else he's working with, but we've got him off our ass for now." Patton breathed a sigh of relief. They weren't safe yet, but that was one small problem crossed off their long list of worries. "God, I'm gonna have to deal with him when we get to the Critic House," Remy grumbled. "I don't blame you for disliking him," Andy scoffed. "Critic's database says he used to work for Wrath's Blade." Thomas scowled. "Forgive my language, but Wrath can fuck off." He shook his head as he turned down another street. "I don't think anyone who's ever worked for them has any morals at all. But hey, maybe I'm just biased, as someone who used to literally rescue children from Wrath's trafficking business." Andy nudged Thomas's shoulder. "Calm down, you're speeding." Thomas took a deep breath. "Right." Patton's left finger twitched. He grit his teeth. Andy's fingers danced on the keyboard of her laptop. "We're getting closer to the Critic House, and I don't see anyone familiar coming after us. Remy, got anything?" "There's a car behind me," he said. "They're right on my back. I don't know what their deal is, but I'm willing to bet it's nothing good." Patton kept an eye on the car driving behind Remy. It didn't swerve after them or speed up to ram into them, but that didn't mean it wasn't following them. The car shifted into another lane and turned down another street. "False alarm, I guess," Andy muttered. Patton wasn't so sure. He drew his gun from his pocket and rested his finger on the trigger. He kept his head on a swivel as they drove. He couldn't let down his guard for even a second. His morals may have been screaming at him to put the gun down and not shoot anyone, but he had to protect the others. If someone came after him, then Remy, Thomas, and Andy would all be in danger too. He had to keep them safe. Strangely enough, they encountered almost no problems during their drive through the city. Either Price and her bounty hunters weren't trying very hard. They lost track of Patton, or they were going to strike the moment Patton thought he was safe. He was sure it was going to be the last option. Andy shut her laptop and shoved it back into her bag. "We're pretty much there. Just straight down this street and turn left into the parking lot." Thomas sped up a little. Patton half wished he would go as fast as he could so they got there sooner, but he kept his mouth shut. He stared out the windshield, waiting for them to turn into the parking lot. They were so close. It looked like they were going to make it. A bang exploded through the air. Something hit the windshield with a crack. The car swerved, and Patton barely had time to scream before they crashed into a lamppost. He lurched forward from the force, his seatbelt barely keeping him from slamming his head on the back of Andy's seat. Patton took a moment to process what happened. He unbuckled his seatbelt and poked his head into the front seat. "Everyone okay?" Andy nodded. She shifted in her seat and glanced around them. "What the fuck?" Her voice trailed off. Patton could see why. A spiderweb of cracks snaked across the windshield, leading to a small hole in the glass, as if someone had shot a bullet through it. Thomas groaned and shook his head. "Shit," he whispered. "What happened?" Patton stared at the hole in the glass. He glanced around their seats for any holes in the leather that might indicate a bullet hit it, but he couldn't find anything. He quickly patted himself down. Nothing hurt when he touched it, and there was no blood from what he could see, so he concluded that he hadn't been shot. He looked Andy up and down, searching for blood, but there was nothing on her. There didn't seem to be any sign of injuries on Thomas either. Where had the bullet gone? Someone shot the car, Andy said. Where's the bullet? Patton gave both of them another once-over. His eye caught on a hole in the arm of Thomas's red leather jacket. He squinted. The edges of the hole were wet. Thomas, Patton said. He pointed at the hole. Thomas turned his head to look at his arm. He touched the leather, and his fingers came away red. Thomas blinked. Huh. He stared at the blood. His eyes fluttered shut, and he slumped in his seat. Damn it, Andy cursed. She reached over and pressed her fingers against his neck. The bullet only hit his arm, so it was unlikely he would die from it, but she must have been worried enough to want to make sure. Patton opened his car door and scrambled out. Remy had parked his bike along the sidewalk and ran up to the car, helmet tossed aside. Everyone else around them on the street was staring in horror. Quite a few were calling the police. Patton tensed. They had to get to the Critic House before the police got here. Rath's blade had agents in the justice system here in Sidehill. If they saw him, he was dead. What happened? Remy asked. Someone shot the car, Patton said, knuckles white on the gun in his pocket. We have to get Thomas into the hotel. He got shot. Remy's eyes widened. We need to get him to a hospital. We need to hide. Patton's breath quickened. If we don't, then Rath is going to find us, and they're going to... No, they're going after you, Remy said. Not us. He pushed Patton in the direction of the Critic House. You go. Andy and I will get Thomas to a hospital. The cops here won't know that we know you. Rath isn't going to come after us, but they'll come after you if you stay out here. Go! Patton stood frozen on the street. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he couldn't leave Remy. He just couldn't. Remy gave him another gentle push. Patton, go. Please. His warm brown eyes pleaded with Patton, and despite thinking that Remy was mad at him earlier, there was no trace of anger anywhere on his face. Tears sprung to Patton's eyes, but he forced them back. Call me and let me know he's okay. Remy nodded once. Patton turned away, but before he could start running, Andy bolted out of the car and grabbed his wrist. He didn't have time to react before she shoved the black satchel she'd been carrying into his hands. I don't know if I'll have time to talk to you about this. Take it. You might need it. Patton forced his confusion aside and took the bag. Thanks. He glanced back at Remy, who had opened Thomas's car door and was checking his pulse. Remy looked up and motioned across the street with his head, silently urging Patton to run. And Patton did. He shoved through the growing crowd around the wreck that was Thomas's car, muttering frantic excuse-me's and sorries. He sprinted faster than he ever had in his life. He couldn't believe he was leaving Remy behind. A pit of guilt settled in his stomach as he ran. He rounded a corner and slowed to a stop when he saw the Critic House. He stood at the edge of the parking lot. He didn't want to go in without Remy. He looked back at the crowd surrounding Thomas's car. He couldn't even see Remy through the sheer amount of people. Patton stepped onto the pavement of the parking lot. He was safe now, but Remy still wasn't. The Critic House didn't look any different than it used to. It looked like any old hotel, emphasis on the old. The red brick it was made of was crumbling in a few places, and one or two of the windows were cracked. Patton walked across the parking lot, tightly gripping the bag Andy had given him in both hands. He was glad he'd kept his backpack on. He wouldn't have wanted to leave it in the car. He paused at the doors. Almost everyone involved in illegal businesses in the country knew about the Critic House. There would surely be members of Rath's Blade in there. The moment he stepped through those doors, everyone would know where he is. He wouldn't be able to leave without a dozen people trailing after him. He pushed open the doors. The lobby was much nicer than the outside of the hotel. The floors gleamed with polish. People lounged on the lavish, extravagant couches, a few of them wiping down bloody knives and reloading guns. One person looked up as the doors swung open, and her eyes widened. She nudged the person next to her and pointed. A hush fell over the lobby. Dozens of pairs of eyes burned into Patton's flesh. He scratched at his left shoulder and lowered his gaze. He walked up to the front desk. Room for one. The receptionist raised an eyebrow. Name? Patton clamped his mouth shut. He'd nearly said poison dart. That wasn't something he needed to make public. Cleared his throat. Patton Hart. The receptionist typed something into his computer. You're aware of our rules? Yes. Good. The receptionist set a key card on the desk. Your room is on the 4th floor. Don't lose your key. Patton took the card and made his way to the elevator. Everyone's eyes followed him. Trying to look as small as possible, he hunched his shoulders and shrank down in his jacket. He wanted to just disappear into the floor. Everyone knew about the bounty on his head. everyone would be waiting for the chance to capture him and drag him to Wrath's Blade. The hotel's rules might deter most people from coming after him, but it wouldn't keep some of the more determined bounty hunters at bay. If they could get away with catching or killing him, they would try. No one else was in the elevator, which was a relief. He waited for it to bring him to the 4th floor. As soon as the doors were open, he hurried down the hall, searching for his room. He found it, unlocked it, and slammed the door shut behind him. Patton stood facing the door for a moment to let his brain catch up with everything that just happened. He left Remy behind to save himself. He was surrounded by enemies who would only refrain from hurting him because they ran the risk of being hunted down themselves if they tried. He backed away from the door. Guilt washed over him for leaving Remy and the others behind, but he had no choice. Not if he wanted to survive. He sat down on the bed. He set his backpack on the floor and looked down at the satchel Andy had given him. He didn't know what could possibly be in there, but he figured now was as good a time as any to check. Patton unbuckled the flap of the bag and opened it. His heart nearly stopped. The inside of the bag was lined with orange and blue fabric, covered in blue whorls, like the skin of a poisoned dart frog. Tucked into the side of the bag was a pistol of the same design, and in a pocket on the opposite side of the bag was a knife in a sheath. A pouch of ammunition sat next to the gun. At the bottom of the bag sat a folded bundle of black clothes and a plastic bag full of cash. The bag fell from his hands and hit the floor. His trigger finger twitched. How did Andy find this? What were she and Price doing when they left the hotel earlier? How had they gotten into his weapons locker? Why did they take this? His finger kept twitching. He grabbed his hand and held it tight to stop it. His fingernails dug into the skin on the back of his left hand. Next time he saw Andy, he was going to have a talk with her. Chapter 32. I think I need therapy. Virgil gently brushed the hair of his Draculaura doll as Diana sorted through her suitcase. Are you sure you don't need help with your stuff? Diana folded a cardigan and set it aside. I'm fine, kiddo. I've got it. She huffed. Gemma never folds her stuff, she whispered, picking up a sweater and holding it up to examine. That's Gemma's stuff? Diana sighed. Yeah. She folded the sweater and set it on her bed, next to where Virgil was sitting. I grabbed her stuff when I was getting my suitcase. I'm going to see if I can visit her tomorrow, since Mr. Chimera is keeping her in the bank's infirmary. I hope they have reliable doctors, because if anything happens to Gemma while she's there, I'm going to fight someone. Virgil set down his little hairbrush and started braiding Draculaura's hair. You couldn't fight anyone if you tried. Diana's shoulders slumped. You're right. She looked around the room. I wish I could have told my parents what happened. They would kill me if they knew I got involved in a crime business. Yeah, your parents kind of suck like that. No offense. None taken. Diana picked up a shirt and folded it. Besides, I think most parents would be upset if their kid took loans from a criminal organization. But mine have always been more strict than Patton. I'd be grounded for life. Diana sighed. How come you guys ended up with the great dad? Virgil shrugged in response. He finished braiding Draculaura's hair and then untangled it to brush it again. He wished he could have brought another one of his dolls. He would have liked for Draculaura to have company. Diana picked up another t-shirt. She didn't fold it and instead just held it in her hands, staring down at the fabric with sad eyes. She lifted her glasses and wiped at him. Sorry, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I just want Gemma to be okay. I wish I would have borrowed from Wrath's Blade instead. Mom said I could go to them as a last resort if I ever had to, but she always said I shouldn't even think about it. Maybe if I'd gone there instead, Gemma would be okay. Virgil didn't quite know what to say to that. Why did you borrow from Chimera again? He asked. I don't think other banks kidnap people to get you to pay back their loans. True, but I needed more than what a normal bank would give me. My parents never let me get a job, so I had nothing to start me off. I needed money to get into the college programs I wanted. Mom and Dad didn't help. She scowled. Sometimes I just wished I had asked Patton if I could move in with you guys. Virgil's mood brightened. That would be awesome. I've never had a sister. Dinah smiled. I've never had brothers. It's really annoying, I'm warning you. They're loud. A laugh escaped Diana's lips. I'm well aware. She set the shirt aside and sat cross-legged on the bed. She tugged at a necklace around her neck. The silver pendant was shaped like a heart. Virg? Yeah? I know my struggles with parents haven't been nearly as bad as yours, but how do you deal with parents that are too strict? Parents that don't let you do anything without them knowing? Parents that don't support you in all the ways you wish they did? Virgil had to think about that. He'd had his fair share of bad parents, but one thing in common was that they all responded to criticism and anger. Whether it was just accusatory comments of, how dare you, and I've done so much for you, and you're so ungrateful, or full-on yelling and screaming, it was all some form of anger. Criticizing adults was never a good way to deal with bad parents, from what he'd seen. They never listened, just assumed he was wrong. I don't know, Virgil admitted. All my parents have yelled at me when I've asked them not to do certain things. They've all been assholes. Watch your language, Diana said automatically. Sorry. Virgil kept brushing his doll's hair. I'm not wrong, though. Adults don't like being told that they're doing something wrong. Have you ever told Patton if he's done something wrong? Virgil furrowed his brow. No, not really. Dad's done most things pretty well. I have told Remy that I would prefer it if he didn't come near me when he smoked, though. He was fine with it, but he's not really a parent. Diana rested her chin on her hand. Do Roman and Remus have different opinions on parents? Do you know? Virgil tensed. He didn't want to tell her all about Remus's troubles with adults. That wasn't Virgil's story to tell. Besides, it would probably take a while. There was too much to explain. Well, Roman has better experiences with adults than Remus and I do, Virgil said. His views on them are flawed at best, though. He thinks adults can fix anything, and they know better just because he wasn't treated like shit in our foster homes. They always praised him for being better than me and Remus. Diana's face fell into something that resembled sympathy. Oh, I didn't know your foster parents played favorites. We never told you. Virgil set down his plastic brush and started braiding Dracula's hair again. Diana seemed to hesitate before she spoke next. How were you and Remus treated? Virgil swallowed. I was treated better than Remus, but that's because Remus wouldn't keep his mouth shut. He wouldn't stay still either. I just suppressed everything and stayed quiet. I had a lot of meltdowns in private, but it was better than the alternative. Diana was silent for a moment. What was the alternative? Her voice was quiet. Virgil stopped braiding his doll's hair. He wasn't sure if he should tell Diana about anything that happened to Remus. She might go tell someone, and Remus might get mad at Virgil for telling someone. Or maybe Roman would get mad at him. Mr. Chimera might find out and think that the things their foster parents did were good, and then he might start doing those things. Virgil shook his head lightly to get his thoughts back on track. That was his anxiety talking. Janus would never do something like that, and Diana would never go and tell everyone else something that Virgil had told her. Virgil untangled the braid in his doll's hair and started brushing it again. Our first foster mother once tied Remus's hands to a table to keep him from messing with things. She did that a couple times, actually. She liked to lock him in dark rooms when he got upset. One of our other foster mothers did that too, our most recent one. She was the worst. She tied my hands together once when she saw me fidgeting. Diana stared at him in horror. Oh my goodness, that's awful! Yeah. You know that Remus has a bad knee, right? Yeah? Why? That's because of our last foster mother. Diana's jaw dropped. Holy shit, that's abuse. That's just straight up abuse. What the hell is wrong with your foster parents? How didn't they get arrested? No one called the police. Even if we told anyone, no one would believe a bunch of kids. Diana blinked at him. You guys, are you guys, like, okay? Nope, Virgil said, popping the pea. I mean, Roman cries at the slightest bit of criticism, because the only times he's been exposed to it are when we and Remus were being screamed at, so he thinks all criticism leads to people shouting at him. I have crippling anxiety and can't interact with people without thinking they're going to hurt me or think I'm weird for behaving the way I am. And panic attacks were almost a daily thing. And Remus's OCD isn't getting much better, even though he's been working on it. Virgil shrugged and combed through Dracula's hair. It just be like that sometimes. Diana spluttered. It shouldn't just be like that sometimes. Nothing should be like that. Not sometimes or ever. She ran a hand through her hair. Oh my god, your foster parents were absolute shitheads. Language. I know. Diana tugged at the sleeves of her cardigan. Did Patton ever try to get you guys into therapy? Virgil hesitated. Well, yeah, but Remus kept telling him we didn't want to talk to anyone. Dad stopped asking eventually. He helped us himself as best he could, and Mr. Minder gave some input when Dad couldn't do everything. I was always too anxious to let him know that I actually did want to see someone. I don't want to be a bother. You are not a bother for asking if you can see a therapist, Diana said in disbelief. Virg, I get that you're anxious about it, but that is exactly why you need to ask someone if you can see a therapist. I'll ask for you if you're too worried about it. Virgil stared at her. You would? He hadn't been expecting her to offer to help him with anything. Yeah, I think Mr. Chimera was even talking with someone on the phone earlier about all 4 of us seeing a counselor. He wouldn't be surprised if any of us asked him if we could see a professional and get our emotional issues sorted out. Virgil stopped brushing his doll's hair and gazed down at the bed. This was almost too much to think about. Was it really possible that he could get some help for the things he'd been going through? Would he even be able to talk once he got into a therapist's office? Would a therapist even listen to him? Would they believe him when he told him about the shit he's been through? You wouldn't have to go into therapy alone, Diana said. I could even go in with you. Virgil considered it. The thought of talking to someone about his problems made his stomach turn with anxiety. But maybe it was time he got some help. And if Diana would be with him while he was getting help, maybe it wouldn't be so bad. I might ask Janus about it later. He set Draculaura aside. This was certainly something to think about. Virgil opened his mouth to ask if Diana's ever gone to therapy, but he was interrupted when he heard frantic footsteps running down the hall outside his room. He exchanged a confused glance with Diana. Someone knocked on the door. Virgil stood and opened it. Roma stood in the doorway, eyes wide with panic. We have drama practice today. Virgil's shoulders slumped. He'd nearly forgotten about the twins' drama lessons. What time is it now? He asked. Almost 3. So they had half an hour to get the twins to practice. Where's Remus? Roman shrugged. Virgil sighed. I'll find him. Go get your stuff ready. He glanced back at Diana. Can we talk about this later? Sure thing, Virg. She nudged her suitcase aside with her foot and walked to the door. Come on, Ro. Roman hurried off to his room, Diana in tow. Virgil veered off to the hallway, since no one was in the upstairs living room that he could see. Remus might still be outside. He entered the downstairs living room. DW was sitting on one of the couches with a bucket of ice cream in her lap. She was covered in a dozen blankets, and she stared at the TV screen as Mr. Minder scrolled through Netflix. You can't eat your trauma away, Dorothy, he said. I can damn sure try, DW said through a mouthful of ice cream. Her gaze flickered over to Virgil. Oh, hey kid, sup? Where's Remus? Probably outside. Thanks. Virgil hurried out the back door. He hadn't been in Janus's backyard yet, but it was nice. Flowers bloomed in flower beds along the edges of the yard. He spotted a greenhouse in the far corner. Since Remus wasn't visible anywhere in the yard, Virgil assumed he was in the greenhouse. Remus? He called when he opened the door to the greenhouse. You in here? Virg! Remus's voice shouted from somewhere within the dozens of plants. Virgil heard footsteps, and then Remus emerged. He was covered in dirt, but his smile was bright. What's up, Emo? Remus said. Janus emerged from the plants, sun hat crooked on his head. Ah, Virgil, good to see you. Do you need something? Virgil looked at Remus. Drama practice? Horror flashed across Remus's face. What time is it? Almost 3. Remus's shoulders relaxed in relief. He turned to Janus. Can you drive me and Roman to drama practice? Janus blinked at the sudden request. Oh, I suppose so. But I don't know if it's safe enough to let the 2 of you out of my sight. I am supposed to be protecting you, after all. We'll be fine, Remus assured him. Please. Roman wouldn't want to miss theater. Janus glanced back and forth between Remus and Virgil. He sighed. I guess I could take the 2 of you to your drama thing. Where is it? Sanders Middle School, Virgil answered. Across the city. It shouldn't take more than 20 minutes to get there, if the traffic is good, Janus mused. Come on then, let's get Roman. Virgil, you're free to wander the greenhouse and the backyard if you like. Just don't water the plants. They've been taken care of. Janus and Remus rushed out of the greenhouse. Virgil watched them go. As soon as they were back inside, he turned to the plants. There were so many different flowers. He'd never really gotten outside much, other than in the past couple years when he'd been with Dad. His foster parents never let him out of the house, so it was a little strange being given full range of the yard. He knelt next to a flower pot with a red flower in it. He really did have a lot to think about, and he had plenty of time to do it while the twins were at theater practice. He reached out and touched the petals of the flower in front of him. Maybe it was time he got some help. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the series. If you like what you hear and you want to read more, you can find the link to the fic and the author in the description. If you want to check out other podfics I've done, you can click on the playlist linked on the screen. See you next time!